In this video, we're going to go over adding rooms to a Revit project, adding room tags to identify those rooms, as well as selecting the rooms in our project. So let's get started. Here in Revit, you can see I have a very basic floor plan here. And let's say I wanted to add rooms and then identify those rooms in the floor plan. To begin, I'd go to the Architectural tab in the Room and Area panel and click Room. RM is the keyboard shortcut. Now, a couple of things happen. I get a Contextual Modify Place Room tab, as well as I get this room text with this little box following my cursor around. Let's talk about the custom commands in the Contextual tab first. The first is Place Rooms Automatically. If you click that, Revit will scan your floor plan, identify what it thinks the room should be, and then place rooms in them. And then you can modify them as you see fit. I don't really like to do this because in most floor plans there's not that many rooms, and I would rather place them myself and ensure that no room is misidentified. The next option is Highlight Boundaries. When you click on that, Revit will highlight all walls capable of bounding a room. Remember that you can disable room bounding for each individual wall by selecting it and going to the Properties panel. However, in this case, all these walls have that checkbox checked, which is the default, which allows them all to bound rooms. So now, watch what happens when I move my cursor inside of an enclosed space. You can see two things happen. Number one, I get this little X lines which are shooting out from where my cursor is, signifying where it intersects the outer walls, and then you can see that the perimeter is highlighted in blue. Might be a little bit easier to see in this small room over here. If I click, the room is automatically created, and you'll notice that I get this tag identifier right here. Now, why did that show up? We were just creating a room. Well, one of the options when we were placing a room is this tag on placement, and it's on by default. And I like to leave that on because it automatically adds the tag, and 9 times out of 10, when I create a room, I'm going to want to tag it so it shows up in my floor plans. I'm going to now click for a couple more times to create these other rooms. So let's talk about some of the properties of these rooms. If I select one of the rooms in question, a couple things happen. The border now highlights in a bright orange. I get the Modify Room tags Contextual tab. I have the options bar up here, which allows me to switch the orientation of this tag from horizontal to vertical to relative to the model, as well as add a leader if the inside of my drawing is too cluttered and I want to drag the room tag outside. In the Properties panel, I have a couple different options. The first, I can actually change what type of room tag is being used. If I click the drop down, you'll notice I have 3 in this template. Room tag with area, which simply adds the area below the tag, and room tag with volume. I'm going to leave it at room tag for right now. So that's how you create a room, but one thing you may notice is this room is just called room, and I may want it to be called bathroom, kitchen, meeting room, etc. So how would I change that? Well, if I just select on the room, I can double click on the text and change it from room to meeting room. And now that room has been renamed from room to meeting room. Now the next number is this little 7 right here, and that's the room identifying number. The default Revit tag includes it. I can change that by double clicking on it. However, it's important to note that your room numbers don't overlap. Otherwise, Revit will give you an error. Okay, so there you go. We've updated the number of the room as well as the text. But I want to talk about one other thing with rooms, and that's selecting one. Let's say you didn't have this tag here, and I wanted to select this room. Well, it's kind of hard to just hover my mouse over here. You'll notice I'm not selecting anything. However, if I move my cursor to the outer edge of the room and click Tab, you'll notice that via that little tooltip that I can select the room. If I click, I now have the room selected. Let's talk about some of the properties for this room. You can see in the constraints area, I have 4 different options: a level, upper limit, limit offset, and base offset. Level signifies the level at which this room was created on. The upper limit signifies the upper limit of where the room is bound by. However, in this case, we have a limit offset, which takes that upper limit and offsets it by 10 feet. I, of course, have a base offset as well, which would offset the minimal level, or as Revit calls it, just its level, by a certain amount. In this case, it's 0. So if you wanted to think about this in 3D space, it's bound by level 1 and then 10 feet above level 1. Okay, the next is the dimensions area, and these are all grayed out because these are not changeable by you. You would have to actually modify the room. It's simply Revit reporting information about the room, such as its area, perimeter, unbounded height, its volume, its computational height. We're not going to get into computational height right now, but we will talk about volume later in this video. Mainly the fact that it says right now, non-computed. And that's because, to save on system resources, Revit doesn't automatically calculate the volume of your room. You have to manually tell Revit to calculate the volume, and then it will show in this properties right here. Like I mentioned before, we'll go over this later in this video. Next is identity data. And just like walls, doors, and other elements within Revit, rooms have various identity data. The main ones that we're going to talk about right now are the number and name. You'll notice that these are currently set to 10 and meeting room, and that's because we updated the tag, it updated the metadata of this room. However, I could also change it to 11 here, and change this to meeting room 2. And now you'll notice when I click back into my scene, the tag updates accordingly. Okay, so now we've gone over the process of creating a room, selecting it, and modifying its properties. But what happens if you have a big open space like this, and you want to treat these two separate sections as separate rooms? Well, I can't just create a wall there because it may not exist in real life, even though that would allow me to bound two separate rooms. So Revit has this command called Room Separator in the Room and Area panel on the Architectural tab. If you click it, you get a contextual tab, Modify Place Room Separation. And here, all you have to do is draw the area that you want to bound a new room in. So in this case, I have the Draw panel right here with a bunch of different drawing options. I have the options to chain it, similar to how we would chain wall, where the next point starts where the previous point ended. I can apply an offset, a radius, etc. In this case, I just want to draw a straight line from the corner here all the way straight up to this wall. Okay, and now I have my room separator there. If I go to identify a room with the RM command, you'll notice that this room is no longer bound by this entire area, but instead only bounds it by the area enclosed from the walls and the room separator. Okay, so the last thing I wanted to talk about is how to actually get Revit to calculate the volume of an area. So if you remember when we selected our room, in the dimensions area of properties, it said volume was non-computed, okay? However, we do have area. So how do we force Revit to calculate the volume of a room? Well, to do that, you go to the Architectural tab in the Room and Area panel and click this little drop-down arrow here, and then select Area and Volume Computations. When you do, you get this dialog box. And the main option we're going to talk about right now is the volumes are computed at finished faces. You can see right now that areas only is selected, meaning volumes aren't calculated when I have a finished face wall. Instead, only areas. However, I'm going to select areas and volumes, click OK. Now you'll notice when I hover over the wall and select the room that the volume now displays in my properties panel.